Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. All right, friends. Glad to be together today for an opportunity to Daylong. As with all Daylong retreats, you bring to it what you can. Honestly, the world is going to pitch its own set of circumstances, but we are entering on a high note. You know, the taking of refuges and precepts is one way to symbolize for ourselves and through verbal karma to symbolize it for others, our values, and that our values are shifting, whether for a small period of time or as a symptom of a greater shift in what we deem valuable and appropriate. We are shifting out of the mind state, the perfectly understandable and appropriate mind state of a human being here on earth, trying to be happy, trying not to be unhappy, trying to be fed, trying not to be hungry, trying to be comfortable, trying not to be miserable. You know, all of the things that people are trying to do. They're trying to be comfortable. They're trying to be satisfied. Yeah. But while this makes sense for a human being, a little meaty human being moving through the world, it once we realize that there's maybe a bit more going on, that there is in fact a mind, it is perceiving things and feeling things, and that it is driven not because it has to do these things, but because it is in fact craving certain experiences. Well, then we begin to step back and we say, do I want to identify with this? Do I want to be a human being in the world, living and dying, driven by sensuality? Or is there maybe another option? Can I step back and look at it and come to understand it? And so today, that's what we're doing. There is no great aha moment. There is no essential piece of information that you must get today. There'll be a day where I'm going to throw out some ideas about what the sense base is, and maybe you'll go, huh, and maybe conditioned by that, huh, you'll take that into the meditation and you'll look at it and you'll say, is that really true? And maybe you'll learn something about these sense organs you've been carrying around your whole life. Maybe you'll learn something about the mind that is moving, you know, one moment to the next and trying to connect it all together into a sensible narrative. And maybe you will learn something about, to some degree, how to let it go. Yeah. And to let it go, let it be. Let it be what it is. And this is the aha moment. This is what we're trying to do. But it's not going to be instantaneous, but it'll be built of a lot of little insights. So today we're looking at something that's so obvious, people don't usually look at it. It's usually one of the early parts of the curriculum in kindergarten or first grade, or wherever your first experience of school. They say you have 5 senses, and that's it. They don't tell you how to use them. They don't tell you where things can go wrong. They just tell you you have them, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense, and it does make sense. And we see this across cultures. This is something everybody can agree with. In Buddhism, there's one extra one that's acknowledged, that being the mental sense. And so today we'll look at them. And we used, as a framework, we encountered a great sutta actually called the analysis of the sense bases. And that is Majjhima Nikaya 137. So you'll see in the notes, there's a link to that on Sutta Central, or you can just look it up, or you can reach behind you and grab it off the bookshelf if you're so fortunate to have a copy of the Pali Canon. But it's a large sutta, so we're gonna pick apart what's immediately relevant. Yeah, because the essence of the sutta, the Buddha starts out by saying, the six external sense bases should be understood. The six internal sense bases should be understood. The six consciousnesses should be understood. And all of that is to understand the context of the word should. This is an option that we have. Yeah. There's nobody out there saying you must understand this. This is the kind of should, like you should look both ways before crossing the street. It's that kind of should. It's an option. It's a good option. The Buddha is saying, like, if you were interested in doing things the right way is to stop and to examine these sense bases. The right way is to understand these sense bases. In doing so, we understand what the Buddha talks about in the fire sermon, one of the three cardinal suttas, where he says the sense bases are on fire. And he lists the sense bases. He says the eye is on fire, the ear is on fire, the nose is on fire. It's not literally on fire. What is it on fire with? He says it's on fire with greed, hatred, and delusion, with birth, aging, and death, with sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. He says that is what is on fire with. If we check in, basically the senses are on fire with us. The stuff that we consider to be our lives and the stuff of our lives, what we want and what we don't want and what we're trying to get, that's what it's on fire with. And when we cool those fires, we realize that the sense bases are just sense bases. They are input points for data, and they are places where experiences arise, but that they're not us. Yeah, they're just conduits, really. So what are the six external sense bases? We know these as the things that the sense bases pick up on. These are visible sights, audible sounds, smells, flavors, and tactile sensations. We're going to leave the mind in its own category, and we're going to talk about it once we get through the five physical senses, and I'll explain why that is when we get there. Yeah. Okay, so close your eyes for a second. And I'm going to say, imagine a ball. Okay, fair enough. So now there are some people who don't visualize things. When they're told to visualize something, they can't see anything. But what impression did you get of the ball? Maybe some saw a ball. Maybe it was round. Maybe it had a little star on it, or it was red, or it was blue. Maybe some people felt a ball. They thought about the weight of a ball, the shape of it, if they were grabbing it. Maybe the first thing that came to mind was the sound of a ball bouncing off of something. Yeah. And that's interesting. But the important thing we can look at is that when you thought of this ball, you just thought of a ball, right? Like I said, think of a ball, and you didn't see a collage of colors in the middle of which was a circle. And you said, that's probably a ball. You just saw a ball. Yeah. Or you just heard a ball, or you just felt a ball. And the first thing to understand about the external sense bases is that they are objects. Yeah. And this, right from the beginning, is our first clue that there is more going on than just a meat body moving through the world like a bacteria or a paramecium. Yeah. And it's like there's some light over there, so it moves in that direction. Or there's a scent of food in that direction, so it moves in that direction. We are more than this. Our senses are a conduit for consciousness to arise, and it is arising to perceive objects. This is amazing. This is the first insight, is that we see objects, we hear sounds. They're packaged things. Now, often the consciousness is arising in a kind of scanning mode. It's kind of like ready for the next thing to happen. Yeah. But if we really watch, what happens is it comes in contact with an object, something it can define and perceive and conceive. It can say that that is a thing, and it does. It creates an object. You see behind me, there's the picture frame with an image of the Buddha. And you think picture frame and you see the frame, yeah? You know, you're not caught up by the wall behind it or the cabinet around it or the stuff under it. You just see the frame. And in that moment, that object is what is being contacted, what is being perceived, what is being felt, what is being known, yeah? So these are the external sense bases, the objects that populate our world. And, you know, four of these are pretty obvious: sights, sounds, smells, flavors. What's not so obvious is the body sense. And this gets wrapped up a lot in our ideas of self. So what are the objects in the bodily sense? Well, they're not quite like, we can form the idea of like a hand, right? Put our hand against something and we say my hand is against something. If we check in with the sense data, though, we see that a tangible or a tactile feeling is a bit more nebulous. We just say, like, what did I really feel? Well, what part of the hand was it, really? What we felt is what we felt is solidity. What we felt was cohesion, or, you know, it's wet or it's dry. What we felt was heat. What we felt was motion, right? This is a tactile sensation, and it's not going to necessarily link up with our physical body, but it's going to be definitely the physical body is related with that contact, yeah? So this is very useful in meditation when we start considering what objects are causing our mind to start to spin and to think about things. We can really say, like, well, what was it? Well, it was a tingling. Well, it was heat. Well, it was a sense of weight. Well, it was the movement of the chest. Well, it was a you know, something brushed by a hair. Yeah. And then we're much closer to getting to the actual object that arose. Yeah. What are the internal sense bases? And this is something that's very interesting when we're trying to figure out, you know, what are we anyway? Um, if you consider like the eye, for instance, there have been many different attempts to figure out where eye consciousness is arising. And in the Buddha's world, they figured it was happening on the lens. Yeah. That as soon as light was hitting the cornea, as an object was being perceived. Later on, they started to dissect the eye and they realized, well, the very sensitive part is in the back of the eye. The lens focuses the light and puts it on the retina. Even later on, something they could not conceive of in the Buddhist time, because they didn't have electrical theory, they didn't really know much about chemistry, is that that signal is it shows up upside down and it goes through a bunch of nerves to the brain where it's put right side up. So understanding the internal sense bases is knowing that consciousness, eye consciousness, arises dependent on this entire thing. There is no location for the sense base. And the Buddha uses the word ayatana, or sphere. I think, again, this is not canonical. You can find commentaries that say that maybe actually there's a little, you know, tiny dot where consciousness arises, but I'm saying maybe just leave that aside. If we really look at the experience, we realize that sometimes it's not easy to define where something is arising. And I'd even say that it's kind of pointless to try. But we know that dependent on this structure, the eye, which is the lens, the retina, the nerves, the connection to the brain, dependent on that structure, consciousness can arise. An object can be perceived through this apparatus. And if some part of that apparatus is damaged, we're probably not going to get the object, yeah? So it isn't one point. It's kind of all of the points, but it's also not all of the points. If the lens is damaged, or say if our eyes are closed, right? The light hits the outside of the eye, and it a little bit gets through the eyelid. The retina still starts picking up on things, yeah? But we can't identify any objects. So there's still light. The organ is still working, but we're not able to perceive an object, yeah? And so contact, the perception of these objects, is dependent on this base. If we were to remove the eye, we would no longer be capable of, perceiving an external sight. The same with sound, the same with smell, the same with, taste. So these sense bases are to be understood. And now I've been using a word consciousness, and the 6 kinds of consciousness are to be understood. And what is going on here? Well, as it turns out, when there is an object, and this object comes in contact with the sense base through the medium, light helps us see things. Yeah? Air, vibration, sound, space helps us hear things. Yeah. Saliva, liquid helps us taste things. When the organ meets the object, then there is the possibility for what we call consciousness. We cognize that there is an object there. Once consciousness arises, a bunch of things play out. You can have perception. You can figure out what this object is based on what you know about it. You're like, okay, that chemical usually arises when I'm eating something salty. That is a salty flavor. Yeah. And you decide whether or not you like that. If you're having soup, then that might be a pleasant association. You're like, oh, it's a good salty soup. If you're eating ice cream, then might be like, whoa, okay, somebody put in too much salt when they should have put in sugar, right? So it's kind of dependent on how we perceive it as the feeling arises. Yeah? This consciousness, when we start looking at it, again, you can't find a location of it. And that's great, because consciousness is a mental thing anyway. But it's dependent on the sense base. When it arises, it is not that we are saying a person is looking through the sense base into the world and seeing this, but the entire structure of our mind is arising at that moment in that place. Yeah. The consciousness, the perception, the feeling is arising based on that sense contact. So there isn't a mind external to that, which is perceiving that object. Our mind, as we perceive it, the feeling, the experience, the thought, the event, is at that sense base. Why I've been leaving the mental sense out is because the mind is kind of particular. And in meditation, what we will find is the sense bases, eventually, once we really, really settle, they kind of go quiet. And they go quiet because we stop doing something in particular. And something that the mind is able to do is the mind is able to think in ideas. And ideas actually can have a dhamma, a thought, can have any of the other senses attributed to it. Yeah. It can use any of the other objects. And whichever one the mind attends to will be the feature that it sees. So if it's thinking of a visual object, then it will see the visual object as a mental object. Yeah. But the same object, it can be like, well, that's round. So it bounces and it's like boing, boing, boing. And it hears, it's thinking in a sound, right? And this is what the mind is capable of doing, is it's able to bridge the gap. Our senses, they arise based on contact and then they cease. This is necessary so that the next moment of contact can arise. We can see that thing moving through space, or we can hear that melody play out. Doesn't happen unless we let go, unless the old consciousness ceases. Yeah. The mind jumps in from time to time. It's filling the gaps. Yeah. It sees something and then it jumps in with an idea of what that would sound like. And then it jumps back to looking for the thing. And then it jumps in and says, well, that probably tastes like this. Yeah. And I mean, look at a strawberry and try to stop yourself from tasting it. You will see that kind of slotted in there will be your mind imagining what that tastes like, what that smells like, when you probably can't taste it. You probably can't smell it. It's probably nowhere near those sense organs. You know, what's happening is that our mind is always working to try to create a narrative, to try to put all of these things together. And the mind is capable of having very complex objects as a sense base. Yeah. So it's easy for us to miss the fact that it's doing this. And the Buddha calls this a sort of magic trick. Yeah. So in meditation, understanding consciousness is understanding that it's just a blip. If you have a consciousness of seeing an object, you know, seeing this remote control to the air conditioner, you see it, yeah, then that is just one moment. And that sight can be pleasant, can be unpleasant, can bring up associations. But all of that, you know, happens in just a moment. And then anything that comes from that, thinking about that, dwelling on that, pondering on that, happens after within the mental sphere. It's not happening within the visual sphere because the visual sphere is passive. It's only able to receive, to perceive. It is dependent on that fleshy part. Yeah. So that's kind of, it's kind of interesting when you think about it. The Buddha talks that 18 preoccupations should be known. And already we're like, wait, I was almost able to cover this when it was 6. What is 18? Well, 18 is just saying that when an object is, when consciousness arises based on one of these contacts, one of these objects hitting the sense organ, there might be one of 3 kinds of feelings. Yeah, a pleasant feeling, a neutral feeling, an unpleasant feeling. One of these 3 might arise. Yeah, and we see this. Yeah? We know this happens. But what happens when we like that, or we dislike that, or we just don't care about that? What happens when there's a persistence, when the mind starts to run with that? Well, what happens is we're no longer seeing the object. We're no longer hearing the object. We're no longer smelling that object, because that could only last for just a moment, just a single consciousness. What happens is that the mind has created its own impression of that object and is working with that. And that it's not until we let go of that preoccupation, that sort of obsessing and staying in the area of our idea of that object, that we can actually have a let go of that consciousness, let go of that. And then a new consciousness can arise at the eye to actually see where the object has gone. So if we get used to the reality of the visual world, that we necessarily have to let go of it because it is always moving. And any moment where we stick or get stuck or don't let it flow or try to understand, try to contemplate, try to hold on to it, we're just grasping at echoes. We're grasping at after images, like the after images that get, you know, burned onto the retina if we stare at something too long. Yeah, that's all we're doing. And this is actually really good for us to understand, to know. It's fortunate. In the great cosmology, having sense bases is considered kind of degraded, right? We have such powerful minds, a mind that can create any object that it wants. Why are we wallowing in the mud in these filthy, gross meat bodies scrounging around trying to get central objects. Well, the Buddha doesn't say just get out. He just doesn't say work hard, get reborn in the heavens, and then do the practice. This helps us understand not self. Yeah? When we really look at it, we have to let go of our idea of self in order to even use these sense bases. When we see the sense bases are non-localized, there is no center to them, that they are all about receiving information, then any notion that we have that we are controlling them is false. Any notion we have that they are located somewhere is false. Any notion that we have that they are a thing in space is false. Yeah? So think about this. Can you see the remote? Yeah. Can you see your own eyeball? Can you see the visual sense base? Give it a try. Is there an eyeball in space that is receiving the information? No. And this is one of these great aha moments. Is you're like, wait, I've been working on the assumption that there is an eye, that there is a place that, I'm pointing it at things so that I can see. I've been working on this idea my whole life. It's pretty practical. And yet when we really stop and we look at the information is when it's that consciousness, the I consciousness arises. What is arising is I consciousness. It's not an I floating in space that is receiving something and then doing some kind of work. It's a consciousness is arising based on that contact and then it's ceasing. It was dependent on the I, but it was not the I itself. It was dependent on the object, but it was not the object itself. And therefore, there is no self. Therefore, that's all that is really happening is the consciousness. And since it ceases, how could it possibly be us? Yeah. And since a new one is arising at a different sense base or in the mind, there's no persistence there. There's no continuity. Since there's no continuity, there's no consciousness that's going from place to place. There's no being. There's no, sentient mind that's going from place to place. Instead, there's just this data arising. So letting go of our preoccupation allows something quite magical to happen. And this is like, at this point, you should be saying, okay, this is great. This is intellectually stimulating, but what do I do with this? Yeah. Well, what we do is we let go of the preoccupations. Yeah. What we do is we come to know the arising of the consciousnesses. Yeah. We come to know the objects. We come to know the sense bases. We come to accept that this is all there is. When we do this, we can actually really experience it. When we actually really experience it, what will stop happening is all of the mental juggling. We won't be going I, mind, I, ear, I, mind, I, body, mind. The mind is not capable of moving because it has no location, but we sure feel like we're moving, don't we? We sure feel like we're being, bounced around by all of these sense impressions. All that's happening is that the mind is juggling a bunch of different data and, it's creating a bunch of objects. If we slow this process down and we start just staying with an experience and allowing consciousness to arise consistently at one of the sense bases, rather than trying to put them all together, then what we'll find is we get a very solid, sturdy impression of whatever object we're perceiving. Yeah. Now, if, this is done in many different ways. Yeah? We could do like looking at an object. So people are familiar with kasina practice, where they look at a physical object. The way this is supposed to develop is that you have to kind of clean all of the associations off of the visual base, off of the eye base, so that you can keep looking at the object. And you keep looking at the object until you realize you're actually starting to see the object. You're not seeing what you think the object is, you're seeing the object. And what is happening is, because the mind is not jumping around and trying to hear the object and taste the object, and it's actually able to just be with that visual impression for a while. And you will find that this becomes quite beautiful. So the reason for this is, Buddha says this is a particular kind of feeling. It's the kind of feeling that accompanies mindfulness. And this is called the sign of the beautiful. We'll say that the object, by virtue of being well known, becomes quite vivid, quite striking. What will happen when we allow this to happen is that the mind will be able to pick up that very tangible, striking object. And instead of bouncing around, instead of trying to create an idea of this object by fleshing it out with multiple senses, it will stay with that very vivid, impression. And even if you close your eyes, even if you stop doing the mantra, even if you stop feeling the breath, that impression, that very vivid impression, can persist as a mental object. And so eventually, the mind is able to rise out of even referencing the senses and just work with a clear mental object. It's very hard for us to do this just on a whim, yeah? It's very hard for us to just work and churn and create a mental object. It's a lot easier to take an object that we know and to develop association with it, develop a concrete understanding of it, and then using that, getting a strong impression of that, use that as a mental object. And it's sort of like, if we ever have a complex problem, we draw it out, right? The sensual world is giving us the opportunity to do this. We have eyes and ears and a nose and a tongue and a body. So it's almost like we're taking little models and we're saying, okay, I know killing is wrong, but how is killing wrong? And we could try to think of it intellectually, but it's just an idea. And then we think of one little person killing another little person, and then they're dead. And in the sensual world, this makes a lot of sense. Once they're dead, they don't get back up again. And this other person goes on, but they're feeling a lot of regret and remorse, and they're trying to get away from the authorities. And just because we have a physical model, it makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? Yeah. It's nice and grounded in reality. And we'd be like, oh yeah, killing is bad. Killing is a bad thing. So independence on sensual objects and independence on tangible things, we are able to build a stronger idea. Yeah. We do this in metta practice. We start out by thinking of somebody we really like, and we're actually thinking of them, our impression of them. This is not them, this is our idea of them. But based on getting a strong sense of, oh, that's a really good person. I really like that person. That person's very friendly. That person's very beneficial. We begin to feel all the emotions as if we are across from them. Yeah. And we are forming a strong mental image, a strong mental Dhamma as an object that we can then keep going. Yeah, we don't have to keep thinking about that person and keep remembering that person. We've got suddenly a mental object. And then we can even shift the mental object to be the friendliness itself, the reaction that we're feeling itself. And then, loving kindness becomes its own object. Yeah. Or in an attractiveness meditation. Yeah. Or in the sign of impermanence. Yeah. The perception of impermanence. This is this process we're doing. We start with the sensual thing, but really getting down to like, what is the thing that we're experiencing? And then building a familiarity with this as a way to step out of it. Yeah, we are not our senses, but since we've got them, we might as well use them, right? And this is what we can explore today, if you want, or don't. But I think that probably because I've thrown the idea out there, it might arise sometime today while you're meditating. And when it does, let it. The preoccupation is to be let go. Imagine that the senses are just happening. Yeah. The senses don't have a location. And just really allow the object to be what the object is, whether it's a tingling, whether it's a sound, whether it's a sight, um, whatever. Yeah. And then let it go. Let it be just that moment in time, and then receive the next one. And if you give this a try, you might find some interesting results. I can't promise you'll get particular results because we all have different sense bases. We're all located in different places. We're all going to be attending to different objects. But I can say that at the very least, this is how they work. And knowing this, what what can we learn? Right? So I'm making up for what your kindergarten teachers failed to failed to fully flesh out. They said you have these sense bases, but they don't really tell you how that's supposed to make you a better person, or how that's supposed to bring you peace, or things to watch out for. Now that you've got that extra information, you can. It's up to you. It's totally up to you. Where are you in time and space? What is arising, and what is your relationship to it? Can you let it settle? Can you let the fires go out? And if so, I guarantee you will still have experiences. Yeah. You will still be you. Yeah. You won't nibbana right then and there and disappear. And everybody will be like, well, what happened to Ryan? Where did he go? I guess he nibbanaed. That's a shame. Would have been nice to see. No, you'll still be there. Your senses will arise again in the future, even if you let them go quiet for a while. Yeah. So with that understanding, let's meditate. Yeah, let's give it a try. So how about we take a 10-minute break, and on the top of the hour, we'll do 45 minutes sitting, and then we'll do a half hour walking, and then we'll do another 45 minutes sitting together, and see if you have to turn off your thing or you have to do anything, whatever. You know me. This is a group effort, yeah. So, but if you are here, if you are in your room in front of a computer, you can consider leaving your little video on, because that might be the pleasant sight that inspires somebody else when they're starting to waffle, when they're starting to think about maybe going to get a drink. They see you and they imagine that you're meditating so good that they're willing to give it another try. It could be. Okay. So we'll take a 10-minute break and then come back together. And at the end of the second meditation, we'll break for lunch. Yeah. So just another morning schedule.